So hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for welcoming me back to Little Thompson Observatory, which I love. This is a part of the community and a part of my heart. I'm just so happy to be here. Yeah, I should not slam electronics on other electronics. Okay. So now that we've got that tech fail out of the way, it's such a success, right? This whole place. I'm just going to hold this behind me. And Mark, do you need me to modulate whatever I'm doing or turn it off and turn it back on? All right. Okay. Does that sound better? A little bit better. Okay.
That's better.
I will gesture less and teach more. So one of the things I'm so happy about is you've got this incredible star wall, you've got this great community, this wonderful relationship with the high school. And yes, talk to Andrea or me if you want to know anything more about Western Governors University or any of the work that I do at National Association of Geoscience Teachers, where I'm still on the advocacy committee, advocating for good astronomy and earth sciences education. And once we get the PowerPoint back up, it's coming, yes, there it is. All right, then we'll actually get into things. And at certain points, I will ask for volunteers or a full group activity. But let's start.
Because there's a question, would we like to do a full group activity?
Would you prefer to stay in your chairs, or would you prefer the opportunities to get up and physically simulate something?
Sure, yes.
Okay. All right. Why don't we let you pick and choose? Those who want to stay in their chairs should, and there's no judgment. And those who want to get up and look like idiots, no judgment. And let's do that. So let me just start by reminding, I have to figure out where to point this. Right, before we begin, we have a couple of holidays coming up. And Monday is Juneteenth, which is our newest federal holiday. And it is a celebration of the end of slavery in the United States. It is a festival of freedom. And when they designed the flag to go with this, they brought in, they didn't plan to, but they brought in some astronomy, because if you remember any of the stories you may have learned when you were younger, knowing the constellations and knowing where the North Star was important for those who were fleeing, trying to get to the Underground Railroad. So they had to know where was north. Of course, the Lone Star is the star of Texas. And they decided that this particular star would represent all the states. And it would be surrounded by a nova burst to show this new beginning. And the arc in the red is the new horizon. And they are American citizens as of the 13th Amendment, which was proposed in 1865, but actually first ratified in 1870. So they were just thrilled to actually be considered full American citizens. And I say it's really we are Americans, no matter our heritage. So it is just so exciting to see that Juneteenth is finally getting the recognition that it deserves. But of course on Wednesday, we have the summer solstice, and this is where you can get up and be a little bit of a fool. So let me put this down, because I kind of need both hands. So for those who would like to stand up, please do, and come around the chairs. Stand wherever you want around the chairs. It doesn't matter where. And I just want you to pretend to be a little planet Earth. And so this is going to be your North Pole right on top of your head. And let's use the projector on the ceiling as the North Star. So let's all point at the North Pole, right? This projector right up here. And if
the one on the ceiling.
The one on the ceiling. Okay. Now, of course, Earth rotates, so you gotta rotate, but keep your north. Do not drop the microphone. Okay, where'd it go? There it is. It's on the table. Thank you. Yes, it's like Pilates. All right. Rotate once. For the younger kids, I make them keep spinning. Thank you. And I apologize for ruining your tech. Okay, let's make sure. This still works, right? Okay. Yeah. So follow what Andrea is doing, and then let's all move toward me and then toward the back and around again. We're just going to do one loop. And so always be pointed. So tilt, you got to tilt. We have a 23.5-degree tilt. You got to tilt, you got to rotate, and you've got to orbit. Come on down. Try not to break anything. If you get dizzy, you may stop. You may stop if you're dizzy. But all right, I think we have the point. Excellent. Well done. Everyone go back to their seats. So that is that is what's going on to every single planetary body. They're rotating, they are revolving, they are getting their exercise in. Your steps are going to look so good tonight. Anyway, point is that when we have something like the solstice, it isn't just a matter of lining up equators in the ecliptic plane, and you got all this stuff going on, and then you have that magical moment where things do line up and you get that sweet spot, and you have an eclipse can occur, or various tides. But in this case, we're going to get that moment where the sun's direct rays are hitting the Tropic of Capricorn, which is 23.4 degrees north of the equator, and that's our longest day of the year. Then as we get to the equinox, that's when the direct rays of the sun hit the equator. And when we go to winter solstice, that's when the direct rays of the sun are hitting 23.4 degrees south of the equator. So for us, it's the shortest day of the year, but for our friends in Argentina, it's their longest day. Because when we have winter solstice, they have summer solstice. Then it goes back again and just bounces back. Yes, Mike?
The line 23.4 degrees north of the equator is the Tropic of Cancer.
Tropic of Cancer, you are correct.
The southern one.
The southern one. My husband is correct, and he is my copy editor. So thank you. All right, so let's talk about Antarctica. I did have the pleasure 30 years ago of, as a graduate student, going to Antarctica and being what they call on ice. And that meant for 10 weeks, this is what I got to wear. So I'm not in this picture, but this is the sort of stuff we wore. We called these bunny boots. And mine were so big. This was all US Navy issue. I've never been 5 feet tall. I mean, I used to think good thoughts and pretend, but. So in order to get those boots on, I had to wear 4 pairs of socks. Because otherwise, there's just too much room. So to be able to finally get out of these clothes, which by the way, weighed like 35 pounds, just the clothing. Then you put on the gear and everything else. When I finally got to New Zealand, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And in those days, I was in my mid-20s, I was really fit. I had abs, like really good abs, so I was gonna show them off. So I just wore this little itty-bitty top to be legal, and totally forgot there was such a thing as an ozone hole, which most people did not know about. But I was doing earth and space sciences. I wasn't in education in those days, I was in research. I was really on the ice to collect meteorites and do scientific analysis. And so I just wasn't thinking. And when I got to the hostel where I was staying, I'd been walking around for an hour at least, and came just in time for the news. And the news had this weird thing called a UV index, and I didn't know what that was. And then they had this really strange thing called the burn time. And it wasn't 30 minutes, it was 15 minutes. Because the ozone hole, which is a thinning it's not really a hole. Just like black holes are not really holes, the ozone hole is not really a hole. It's a thinning in the protective layer of the ozone concentration we have above us, and I'll show you a video and talk to you more about that. But it was enough so that someone with my very pale skin could burn in 15 minutes. I didn't know that, and I was accustomed, coming from Antarctica, to their, being lots of protection around me. I just wasn't thinking. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, which is mostly cloudy all of the time. I just didn't think about sunshine. Yeah, second-degree burns on the shoulders and back, everything that was exposed, not good. So I'm now really, really neurotic, and Mike will attest, I have been for 30 years, about hat, long sleeves, sunscreen, glasses, the whole bit. You don't go outside unless you look like you're about to do a Lawrence of Arabia trek, because, gotta be careful. And the reason is that back in those days, we were only just getting a sense of what the ozone hole was like. Ozone is a molecule. Okay, I need 3 volunteers, please. May I have 3 volunteers? Come up front.
You are being very patient.
Yes, thank you. All right, you guys are oxygen molecules. And, okay, upper arms only, but go ahead and grab each other. Just the upper arms, not hands, upper arms. Okay. Okay, good, very good. So this is an ozone molecule. You have 3 oxygens. However, it's a very unstable molecule. And your name is?
Sophie.
Sophie. You're going to put your second hand on Ron's arm. So sometimes there's an oxygen who's like, no, actually, I just want to be with you. And now you're going to do the same thing. Both of your hands on Daniela's arm. No, I just want to be with you. And so ozone's really unstable because we don't know what Sophie's going to do. Is Sophie going to go with Daniela? Is Sophie going to go with Ron? Oh my gosh, this is a soap opera. And this just keeps going back and forth and back and forth. Keep switching back and forth, right? Okay. You get the idea. You may sit down. Thank you very much. So we have all this drama in the upper atmosphere where we have this ozone. And of course, it's not only in the upper atmosphere. Okay, Mike, hold off. I was going to do this slide afterward, but let's talk first. We do have ozone right down here where we are, the surface of Earth, breathing in the air. The layer of this, this is the bottom layer of Earth's atmosphere called the troposphere. This is where we get all the tropical rain, or the rain in Berthoud, whatever. All the weather and climate is going to be here in the troposphere because these first 10 miles of Earth's atmosphere is where all the water is for, all intents and purposes. But it's also where ozone can get trapped, ozone from cars and factories and who knows what. And especially in the Denver area, you get thermal inversions where you're supposed to have warm air rising over cold air, but sometimes the warmer air gets trapped under the cold air and smog can collect. And that's why Denver especially is almost always on a map for high ozone, which can be irritating for people who have asthma or other respiratory illnesses. And is there anybody here who has a story? No, you're all healthy, you have no problem breathing on a high smog or high ozone day?
Well, I have asthma.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my story. I have asthma.
Okay, but you know that when there's a warning, maybe you shouldn't go out and do that 10K run you were planning on, because breathing can be hard if there's a lot of smog or ozone right where you are. Well, we want all of the ozone in the ozone layer because, as the video we're about to watch will show, it blocks radiation. Not all radiation, but some of it. And so, Mike, this is a good time for me to rest my voice and for you to get that video going. And it's the first one that says Precious Ozone. And thank you, everyone, for your patience. This all works beautifully on my laptop at home, but we're not at my home, so it's all good. Oh, you've got it. We're going to make it full screen and put the captions on. The closed captions. Thank you.
Space is closer than you think. When you're flying in an airliner at 11 kilometers above sea level, 3/4 of all the air in the atmosphere is beneath you. At just 20 kilometers above sea level, pressure is so low that water boils at body temperature. Any altitude above 20 kilometers is like being in space as far as the human body is concerned. But the atmosphere extends further, getting thinner and thinner the higher you go. In the upper reaches of the atmosphere, charged particles blown off the surface of the sun smash into widely spaced air molecules, creating spectacular aurora. This is a view from about 400 kilometers up. From here, the atmosphere is just a delicate glow. But this is all there is between us and space. It protects and nurtures all life on the surface. The edge of space is just 100 kilometers above the ground. Rise above this altitude and you're officially an astronaut. 99.99997% of the air in the atmosphere lies below this level. This shows the distribution of ozone in the atmosphere. It is densest at an altitude of about 26 kilometers. If we separated the ozone from the rest of the air and brought it all together at sea level pressure and temperature, it would form a layer just about 3 millimeters thick. But that's not how ozone is found. This is the ozone layer, the diaphanous region of the stratosphere that filters out 99% of the harmful UVB radiation in sunlight. Ozone is continually created and destroyed in the atmosphere as oxygen interacts with UV. It's a dynamic process, but man-made chemicals can break the cycle. If you brought all the air in the atmosphere together at sea level pressure and 15 degrees centigrade, this is how much there'd be. It would fit in a sphere just 2,000 kilometers across. Within that air, there is about 3 billion tons of ozone, which if you brought it all together, would look like this. All life on Earth relies on this precious gas in the stratosphere. It's potent, but it's vulnerable. It doesn't take much to disrupt the dynamic process of ozone production. CFCs would quickly have depleted our ozone, but the Vienna Convention has saved the ozone layer from destruction. Ongoing stewardship will secure it.
All right, thank you, Mike. Let's turn that off. And any questions while we go back to the PowerPoint? That was interesting, right? Yeah, our atmosphere is so thin and so precious. And so as we saw in the video, it's the ultraviolet radiation that we're really going to focus on tonight, because that's what the ozone layer helps block, really by absorbing it. It's that ultraviolet radiation that creates the ozone. It'll break apart an O2 molecule, which is the oxygen we breathe. And so there are always going to be some oxygen atoms just floating around by themselves. And they'll, just like we saw earlier, we had Sophia and Danielle and Ron, and they will make this threesome, this dramatic thing, but they will break apart also. So there's constantly this, we're going to make O2, no, we're going to make O3, no, we're going to break apart again. And it's in balance, and it's normally fine until certain chemicals get in the way. Well, we'll talk about the chemicals later. What I want to point out is we know from going to the dentist, don't you know they throw the lead apron on you and then they run out of the room for this little zzz, right? X-rays can be very hazardous to human health. And if you have UV radiation that's really super close to X radiation, just like the UVC rays are, then we have to be careful, because that's where risk of skin cancer comes. And this is from the Skin Cancer Foundation. They say in 2023, this year, there are going to be all these new cases of melanoma diagnosed. And people who have darker skin tones usually don't even think they can tan or burn, but of course they can get as much skin damage as anybody else. So it's not just the light skin, it's the darker skin. And that's one reason why so many Americans will develop skin cancer. Some of it is also our era, with some exceptions that I am happy to see. Many of us are of a certain age, whoops, I was going to get to that later, are of a certain age where we didn't wear much protection from the sun. But let's go to this one and talk about what can happen. And I have to admit, I was telling Mike and a few other people earlier, I learned so much about cannabis grow operations while researching this slide, OMG. So there is thriving business in UV lights for grow operations, or your garden, which does not have to have any cannabis in it. And that really harmful UVC stuff is used as a germicide, meaning it will kill the bacteria. If you guys remember a few years ago when the pandemic was first starting, a lot of people said, oh, you should get a UV light and it'll kill all the germs and it'll make COVID go away. Well, it will kill the germs. It did not make COVID go away because COVID is a virus which is not going to be killed by UV light. But if you want to get rid of your aphids or your mildew, this is fantastic. But be really super careful because I saw this one guy in a video who's like, oh, I'm not sure if this is on. And he turned the lamp right into his face. It was like, oh my gosh, don't do that. And I saw more skin damage on those presenters. And they were like, oh no, it's cool. And it's like, no, you're going to really regret using this in about 3 years, trust me.
Is UVC like those lamps that you go over your sheets? Is that what?
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, and if you are going to use it as a disinfectant, 5-minute doses maximum. You know, it's normally just a few seconds at a time. But yes, that's exactly what they're talking about. And there are people who are like, boy, I can't see it. No, you can't. Not with your naked eye. Mike.
I was just going to mention that during the pandemic, my little brother runs a recording studio in Pittsburgh, and he couldn't stop work, so he redesigned his studio so that at night, when everyone was out in the building, UVC lamps would turn on in all of the tracking rooms and sterilize them before the next group of artists came in, so that this could all be done contact-free.
That's impressive.
Well,
So,
no cases, so either everybody was being careful coming in or it worked.
okay. So be really careful. Eye damage and blindness can occur. Burning will occur. And of course, you can die. So be careful there. Why do cannabis grow operations love this? Because, of course, photosynthesis. And if you use it right, meaning only during the last 2 weeks of plant growth and only in 15-minute doses, you know, every 8 hours or 12 hours or whatever, you're going to increase the aroma and the taste and the various chemicals that people want in the product that they're going to buy. But you got to be careful. You don't want to stress the plant out because plants, just like you, will get thirsty. They'll start to wilt, they'll start to age prematurely. You know, if all goes well, you'll get to 100, and your plants may only get to 100 days. So be really careful. And of course, even with humans, but this occurs for other animals and plants, the immune system will start to not work well. So don't go to a tanning bed, especially you younger folk. Don't do that, because that quote-unquote healthy tan is one of the least healthy things you can do for yourself, and it may be why 2 decades later you have an immunocompromised system. So, Andrea, I want to thank you very, very much. This is Andrea. And yes, those of us who are not young, we're young at heart. We're of the right era to remember Aquanet and all of this other stuff, where we would put CFC producing materials in our environment with abandon because we didn't know there was going to be a problem, right? This is in the days before the ozone hole was discovered. And anyone who did know about it was, you know, some geeky scientist somewhere. So I do have a little bit of a commercial that I'm going to show on this one. Let's go ahead and start this next one, Mike. This whatever happened to the ozone hole, because I think they've got the commercial, which is a lot of fun.
And by the way, the other pictures of my friends are used with permission. We're still friends. Their hair got so poofy with the hairspray, but yeah, we don't do that anymore.
Okay, and this is why.
But the refrigerants ruined that balance. In the 1970s, scientists discovered that these processes were not in equilibrium and that refrigerants like CFCs were actually interfering with the normal ozone layer.
Can we make it louder?
The ozone layer. Solar radiation can break them apart, leaving lone chlorine atoms floating around in the atmosphere. These can break down ozone molecules, leaving behind O2 and ClO, or chlorine monoxide. Now that would be bad enough, but the oxygen atom in chlorine monoxide can go on to combine with a lone oxygen atom in the atmosphere to become O2, leaving behind chlorine again. This means we once again have a chlorine atom that can then react with a different O3 molecule, starting the whole process over and over again. In fact, one chlorine atom can destroy up to 100,000 ozone molecules. And chlorine isn't the only thing that can break apart ozone molecules. Bromine from halons and methyl bromide found in things like fire extinguishers and pesticides also contributes to the Antarctic ozone hole. And bromine can even be 40 to 100 times more destructive to ozone than chlorine. For more info on those bromine reactions,
Okay, let's cut it,
and
Mike.
fascinating
This doesn't have the cute commercial, so I'll have to remember which one I have that has it. But the point is, my hair is naturally poofy. Andrea, I'm sorry, yours isn't. No. So, but that's okay. We don't want poofy hair. We don't want all that propellant, because it turns out that the chlorine really would get into the soap opera drama that I had talked about earlier. And what would happen is these molecules would make their way up into the stratosphere. Strato means layer. Stratosphere is the layer of Earth's atmosphere, meaning that's the layer of Earth's atmosphere that contains the ozone layer. So that's why the stratosphere has that name. Well, the chlorine would get sliced off from the CFC molecule by the ultraviolet radiation. Just like UV rays can break apart ozone, it can break apart the CFCs, and then the chlorine and the oxygen get together. We're right back to the soap opera drama, but now we have the mysterious interloper, you know. I don't know, I grew up watching soap operas. This all makes sense to me. It's all stories. But in this case, it was real science, and we love having the diatomic oxygen that we breathe. But we need the ozone to protect us. And those of us of a certain age were unexposed for a while. So if you know people who are approaching age 70 or over age 70, and they've been diagnosed with skin cancer, that may be a factor. If you don't, but you know someone you love who is approaching that, have them go to a doctor and get checked. It's very prevalent among people who were out and about in the sunshine playing around in the 70s and 80s and even early to mid 90s. Okay, so by 1995, the Nobel Prize Committee realized, hey, you know, this was actually already the subject of a whole lot of research. It wasn't brand new. So not Alfred Molina, he's an actor, I'm sorry. Mario Molina, along with Paul Crutzen and Sherwood Rowland. Actually, Molina and Rowland were research partners back in the early 1970s. And that's when they started really working on this whole, gee, what's going on with CFCs in the stratosphere? Are we really getting disruption in the ozone? And they had said yes, but it kind of got shelved until the mid-1980s, when we got the Antarctic Hadley Base research going, no, something important is going on here, you have to look at it again. And the world reacted very quickly, and for once the Nobel Prize Committee reacted quickly. Quite often it takes the Nobel Prize Committee like 50 or 70 years to decide your work was Nobel worthy. But the catch is you have to be alive to receive the award, which is tricky, which is why people you've never heard of get the award sometimes, and people you really think should have gotten the award didn't. Weird rules. Well, go ahead and play the clip, and let's hear from Mario Molina himself. So you're going to go to the next one. Yes. Yes. And full screen. Thank you.
West, Mario Molina, a chemist whose work on the ozone layer earned him a Nobel Prize in 1995, quietly passed away in Mexico City. He was 77. Molina's work was crucial to enacting the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer in 1987, and it made him one of the most consequential scientists of the past 50 years.
First of all, the medal was particularly rewarding because it's not just for my work as a scientist, but for the impact that it has had on society, the benefit of society. Because my work really started as a scientist and then worrying about environmental problems caused by human activities. We decided to ask a question about some chemicals that were just being released to the environment, and we realized that they could pose a serious global environmental problem. At the beginning it was just a hypothesis, but the science was sound, and we were able to work with the scientific community and to really pin down the science to a very good degree. But what was perhaps a step further was not just to stop at the science itself, but to communicate this to society and then to try to do something about it. So we were fortunate also to be able to work with colleagues, even diplomats and so on, so that it all led to an international agreement.
You probably know about the holes that have occurred in the ozone layer over the years over both the north and the south poles. And you maybe vaguely remember something about the high air in the 1980s and mass volumes of hairspray being one of the culprits? Thinning of the ozone in a particular area. The thickness of the ozone layer naturally varies worldwide. It's generally thinner near the equator and thicker near the poles. Thickness refers to how much ozone is in a column over a given area. It varies seasonally due to atmospheric circulation patterns and solar intensity. The first scientific paper on unanticipated and large decreases in ozone concentrations over the Antarctic stations of Halley and Faraday was published in 1985 by Joe Farman, Brian Gardner, and Jonathan Shanklin. Interestingly, Mario Molina and American scientist Frank Sherwood-Rowland published a paper 11 years prior, in 1974, that found chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, chemicals used in a variety of products, were destroying the ozone.
And let's stop it there. Okay, and that's where I got that slide, and so we're right back. Any comments or questions while we get ourselves back on the PowerPoint?
So was that a
Yes.
commercial or
The bold hole? That was a real commercial.
an MTV video?
Hard to tell.
Tell the difference in the 80s.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Okay, so,
Sorry, I think you had another question.
oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead. Let me go back
I
here.
wonder why the ozone layer is thicker near the poles, and then why the hole is thinning out more at the poles.
Oh, okay, sure. So in terms of why the concentration of ozone would be thicker around at the poles and thinner around the equator has to do in part with Earth's rotation. When you see something spinning around, it'll kind of bulge out, and same thing with with Earth, but you know, the atmosphere is a fluid, and fluids will, when they spin, let's see, I'm kind of, help me out if I mangle this. There we go. Thank you very much, Andrea. Don't get ill. Don't get ill. Yeah, so what we're talking about is conservation of momentum of the molecules in the atmosphere, and it works out that you spin, is it faster at the equator? Yes, you spin faster at the equator, and so those molecules are really moving fast, and they're going to move away from the equator and toward the poles where things are calmer and more sedate. I mean, you're still spinning, you're still moving pretty quickly, but it's at a different rate of speed. And as Andrea was demonstrating, if you've ever watched, say, the Winter Olympics, and there's an ice skater and she's doing her spins, if she wants to go faster, she'll bring her arms close together so she's as vertical as possible. If she wants to slow down, she'll open her arms out. Did that help, or have I confused you?
The ozone's going to be thicker at the poles, and therefore the concentration of CFCs is also thicker at the poles?
Well, yeah, what happens is the molecules do move around quite a bit in the air. And they were talking about seasonal migration. You also have to think about where the chemicals are coming from. Most are manufactured in the northern hemisphere. Now, back in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, it was in North America. Now, it's China. So, and yes, CFCs and related compounds are still being manufactured, just at lower rates. And there are some, just like we were talking about illegal grow versus legal grow operations for cannabis, in China and other parts of the world, there can be illegal CFC or related ozone depleting substance compound manufacture, because they still want their propellants and their foams for whatever military or economic purposes. So yeah, we're not completely done with this problem. It's getting better, but humans aren't perfect. So yes, things will migrate from northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere. They'll get to the equator, and then they'll get caught in that spinning, and they'll migrate to the poles. It is amazing what gets caught at the poles. 30 years ago when I was in Antarctica, one of my colleagues just put up what was basically sticky paper and left it up in the South Pole Station of the US South Pole Station. Left it up for 2 weeks, and when he brought it back to the University of Pittsburgh to analyze it, it had aircraft paint chips from certain experimental aircraft the US military was testing in the northern hemisphere. What was that doing at the South Pole? All right, stuff migrates. This guy also caught cosmic dust particles and all sorts of fascinating things. And that was 30 years ago, so who knows what's in there now? Anything else? Yes?
Has there been any correlation with skin cancer rates, let's say, on the South Island of New Zealand?
Yes.
To the ozone hole? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you talk to someone from New Zealand or Australia now, if they're under age 30, they know slip, slap, slop. You slip on a long sleeve shirt, you slap on a hat, or you slop on some sunscreen or whatever, right? It's just, it's what they teach their children, because the skin cancer rates of very fair people of European heritage who lived in or under that thinning that we call the ozone hole, yeah, their skin cancer rates were way up. And eye damage rates. Yes, Mike.
Out of curiosity, what altitude was that city at in New Zealand that you were in where you got burned?
Well, let's see. Let me think. That would have been Christchurch, New Zealand. And I don't know the elevation. That's a Wikipedia question. But not nearly as high as Colorado is. It was fairly close to sea level. I mean, it's an island.
I was just curious, because here, I got 45 minutes of sun exposure, and then after that, you start to get burned. I went to visit my sister in Minnesota, and I was very close to sea level, and I had my shirt off all day long in the summer, and I didn't get anything. And so I just was, I'm not saying valid or invalid anything, that's what I experienced.
Right. No, fair. Not only do you have more atmosphere in Minnesota than you do in Montana or Colorado, just because of the elevation, but it's also a matter of what season you're there, how intense are you. That's why summer solstice is important. Where are those direct rays of the sun? Because if you were visiting, and I don't know, but let's say you were visiting Minnesota in August, that's closer to the fall equinox, and so the sun's rays aren't hitting you exactly, they're hitting you more at an angle. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Good.
He says the elevation in Christchurch is 70 feet.
70 feet. 70. Thank you. So,
That's right at,
It is on the shore of the,
It's a
there
It's
you
a
go,
north.
that's 70 feet, it's on the shore.
yeah, so there should have been a lot of atmosphere to protect me, and there was a lot of oxygen, O2, but there wasn't a lot of ozone, O3, and that's what I needed. Okay, so in 1987, now think about this. The scientific paper got published in 1985, and most people ignore scientists. But this one was so terrifying, and it would hit everybody. It would hit the wealthy as well as the poor. It would hit the traditional communities as much as the industrialized societies. In other words, everybody had a stake in this. So by 1987, there was already a treaty that was being ratified. And the two people who were really into this were US President Ronald Reagan and UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Does anybody remember those people? Okay, don't give me your political opinions. I have mine too. But the thing about Margaret Thatcher is she had been trained as a chemist, just like Angela Merkel later on of Germany, trained as a chemist. And that science background, as soon as Margaret Thatcher saw what the implications were, yeah, she was like, oh, we got to do something about this. Also, people in the UK are known for being fair-skinned and easy to burn. Ronald Reagan himself had skin cancer, bouts of skin cancer. California, he was governor of California. So he knew firsthand how unpleasant that disease was. Remember, we now have treatments for cancer that did not exist in those days. So in the 1970s and 80s, skin cancer was potentially life-threatening. Today, it's kind of an annoyance, right? You go, you get a treatment from your doctor, you're done. But that wasn't the case 35, 40 years ago. So skin cancer has scared the heck out of older people. And who are the decision makers in charge? Old people. So they were looking at this and going, yep, we're going to ban this. We don't want to die of cancer. There's this really amazing podcast by the scientists who are involved in these negotiations. Not going to subject you to it right now because we do want to wrap this up. But Kofi Annan, one of the Secretary Generals of the US, called this perhaps the single most successful international agreement to date has been the Montreal Protocol. It is, to my knowledge, the only international agreement that not only has, since 1987, every single country on earth signed on to. Think about that. Even North Korea, even the countries who don't want to agree to anything, they agreed to this. And it's been maintained. Other than the occasional factory in China, everyone around the world has adhered to it. So here's a very long quote from Ronald Reagan. I'm not going to read you the whole thing. I'm just going to do the last line. It's a monumental achievement because the business community, the environmental community, the international diplomacy community, everybody got together and said, yep, we have finally found something that can unite humanity, and we need to do something about it. And by golly, they did. Blows my mind. That would never happen today. But it should, and it could, and that's the important part. It could. Just because people are arguing now doesn't mean we're always going to argue. And this was the other impressive thing. For those of you who remember the days of Freon and hairspray. They were made primarily by these three companies, primarily DuPont, but also General Motors. They used the foams and the propellants in their cars, and Frigidaire for refrigerators, right? And they were among the first. They moved even faster than the governments did because they were immediately like, oh my gosh, our bottom line is gonna crater. No one's gonna work with, our stock prices are just gonna fall through the floor. So they were very quick to start looking for replacements. And they got them to market super fast. I remember when everything went non-aerosol. Do you guys remember that? Yeah, pump bottles. But it helped. And so when you have the private sector working just from greed, just for profitability, in the same direction as the environmentalists want them to go anyway, and international policy wonks want them to go anyway, that's incredible. So here's the other thing. Turns out CFCs are like CO2. They're like methane. They're greenhouse gases. Well, we didn't know that in the 80s. All of this got done, and then they were scratching their heads looking at the data and going, oh. So go ahead and play the video. This will be the climate connection one. Yep. And we're going to play the whole thing. So full screen and captions.
This is one of the chemicals that destroy ozone in the stratosphere. But that's not all it does. It's also a greenhouse gas. Like carbon dioxide, it prevents heat energy escaping into space and so contributes to global warming. But this ozone-depleting substance is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Over a timescale of 100 years, 1 kilogram of CFC-11 has the same impact on global warming as 4,660 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And this isn't even a particularly bad one. Other ozone-depleting substances have an even stronger global warming effect. It's been estimated that if we had not acted to stop these chemicals being used, then by 2010 we would have added the equivalent of 135 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. To put that saving into perspective, it's equivalent to a quarter of all global emissions between 1990 and 2010. Without early action on ozone-depleting substances, culminating in the Vienna Convention and Montreal Protocol, we would already have lost the battle to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade. The Montreal Protocol was not designed to mitigate global warming, but it has been spectacularly successful in doing so, and its work is not yet done. Some ozone-depleting substances are still being phased out. Some remain in the existing equipment, building insulation and elsewhere, and these need to be managed safely. And now there's a new threat to the climate from the success of the Montreal Protocol itself. These HFCs are some of the chemicals that replace the CFCs. They're not damaging to the ozone layer, but they still contribute to global warming. Their contribution is currently small, but emissions are growing fast, so they're a cause of grave concern. The Montreal Protocol led to a hunt for chemicals such as HFCs that could replace CFCs, but these are contributing to global warming. Working together, we can replace HFCs with chemicals that do not destroy ozone and are climate friendly.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So yeah, we can certainly continue to innovate. There are lots of people who are doing fantastic work in chemistry and physics and in atmospheric science who are, trying to make this all as climate friendly as possible so that we lower the emissions that we know are bad. And there are also political folks. The Kigali Agreement from 2016 set controls on these newer compounds. And we know that if we can keep their concentration very low, we can also keep global warming lower. Now, obviously, it's not perfect. This particular paper, which was just published recently, said that actually making some of these ozone-depleting substance replacements can, in the production process, create new CFCs that leak out of their storage containers. Oops, don't want that. When we look at what the Europeans are doing, you'll see here, this says 2017. So they were really good at keeping their levels low, and then it started creeping up. Here's the dip from the start of the pandemic, but then it crept up again. So there's a trend line that's moving upward in Europe. So they're kind of slacking a little too. It's not just China that has an issue. And then this paper just got published on May 25. That was less than a month ago. That was what, 3 weeks ago? Talking about these very short-lived substances that are ozone depleting. And I drink decaf coffee, so ooh, I'm bad. But I'm going to keep drinking my decaf and hoping that, again, corporations or small startups will be able to solve the problems themselves without any government intervention needed, because often profitability is the best motive you need. So we are getting better, and if current trends continue, we will probably by the mid-2060s get to at or even above the level of that the ozone layer over the South Pole had before we even noticed there was a problem. So that's impressive, actually, because the early predictions were that this would not occur until around 2075 or 2080. So we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, which in this case, when you're saving the planet, ahead of schedule is a good thing. So, still needs some work, but we're getting there. This is the latest NASA ozone map from January 2023. And, not bad. I would love to go back. I would love to go back to Christchurch, but I can't wear that little top anymore. So
does that slide say that 06 was the worst year?
The worst year was actually 2000. But yeah, 2005, 2006, they were still pretty bad. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Well, then I did have one more video. You're certainly welcome to stick around if you want to watch it. But I'm just going to conclude here so that those who want to leave, apparently there is more bad weather, more storms coming, so I don't want to keep you. If you need to drive home, be safe, and I will take no offense if you leave immediately. But I just want to emphasize that the Ozone Secretariat of the United Nations, Meg Saki, said, when sound science is the basis for universal action, we can overcome what may seem insurmountable. And it's true, we can solve problems. Humans make problems, humans solve problems. This is what we do. This is why education is so important, and literacy, and awareness, and interest, and curiosity. You don't have to save the world yourself, but you can be part of it. That's it. Thank you. All right. Questions, comments, hurried, fleeing motions? It's okay.
I think actually leaving now, actually, you can drive it into it. So
Okay.
it's supposed to slow down over the next hour. It's not raining a lot more.
Okay.
Do you know what products have the HFCs in them and how you pronounce that as a molecule?
I can go back to the slide and pronounce it as a molecule if you want. The more important thing is most of these are industrial chemicals that are used by Boeing or Lockheed Martin. Remember we saw General Motors was a big producer back in the 70s. Well now, you know, anyone who's making certain kinds of foams, certain kinds of flame retardants, you know, there are all sorts of industrial chemicals that are used in a variety of ways and things we don't even think about. It is amazing what gets sprayed onto your couch to make it water resistant. I'm not saying it's these chemicals necessarily, but you know, you may have heard of forever chemicals in the news. So there are all sorts of unpronounceable chemical compounds that are in everything. They're in plastic, and sadly, when we're not careful, it gets into our food, it gets into what we breathe. Our bloodstreams are full of all sorts of chemical compounds that people did not know about 50 years ago. So yeah, I don't want to freak you out because you're like, oh my gosh, my blood is full of stuff that can kill me. Yes, but if you're taking good care of yourself with diet and exercise, although we have to be careful. Remember I was telling Mike, if there's a high ozone day, you don't necessarily want to go running outside that day. Maybe that's the Planet Fitness day. So, you know, it used to be so simple and now it's less simple, but we can still figure this out. So no, don't be paranoid. Everything can be a problem, but not necessarily. Others? Yeah, I know. My younger daughter tends to be on the nervous side, so and that's her dad choking on that. Yeah, she would immediately start panicking about, oh my gosh, everything is gonna, well, you know, a lot of it is mindset. You need to be resilient. So speaking of, let me show this last video. So Mike, if you don't mind, let's cue up that last one. Remember, we're about 56 seconds in, and let's see what to do next.
For 50 years, UNEP has been working with the global community to safeguard the environment. Experience shows us that inclusive multilateralism is more effective than going it alone. We came together to protect the ozone layer with the Montreal Protocol, which was in danger of collapsing by the mid-21st century, but is now on track to return to pre-1980s levels by the 2060s. With the Minamata Convention, the international community agreed to phase out mercury, and in 2020, a global ban for the trade of most mercury-added products came into force. In the 1990s, UNEP realized the importance of integrating sustainability into the global finance sector. Now, UNEP Finance Initiatives members include over 365 banks, insurers, and investors, working with governments to invest in a sustainable future. Countries are cooperating like never before to stop the trade in endangered species. And since its inception, no CITES-listed species has ever become extinct as a result of trade. As we look towards a post-pandemic future, emissions and temperatures continue to rise, and we must rise to the challenge to protect people and planet. 50 years of experience has shown us that when we work together, we can make change. It is possible.
So that's it. We can do this. You know, remember I said earlier I grew up at Buffalo? I don't know if these names ring a bell, but does anyone recall Love Canal? Yeah. So one of the people I went to high school with was the chemist who found the contamination at Love Canal, which was an entire housing community near basically a chemical dump. And it became a U.S. Superfund site. It took millions of dollars, a lot of money to clean that up. But they were able to clean it up and build another housing development in that exact same place, and those kids are healthy, okay? Another Western New York story. Buffalo is right on Lake Erie. When I was a kid, and honestly, this is my recollection, very small kid, we took the school bus down to Lake Erie. We were going to have the field trip, and we got there and it smelled really bad, and there were fish jumping out of the water onto the land to die because Lake Erie was so polluted. And the teacher said, right, back on the bus, everybody. Well, it has been cleaned up. My brother still lives in the Buffalo, New York area, and Lake Erie was cleaned up through an international effort. The US and Canada had to work together to clean up all the Great Lakes, and they restocked them with fish, and now it's a tourist destination. The locals go to fish. So it is, you know, it is possible. It isn't just this one. There are lots and lots and lots of examples, and why is no one teaching you this in school?
Do you remember the Cuyahoga River catching fire?
Oh gosh, yes. All right, so Mike, were you in Pittsburgh when the Cuyahoga River caught fire?
Actually, the Cuyahoga River caught fire while I was not far from
Okay.
I was in Oakland when it happened. Yep, the tower of this terminal overlooking the lake is Erie.
So our rivers don't catch fire anymore, right? It was under President Richard Nixon, a Republican. It was under his administration when the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency was established and funded. And yes, it may have had funding difficulties in the years since, but it's still here. But again, we don't need to rely on government only. There are nonprofit organizations, there are private companies who, through their own profit motive, you know, lots of environmental startups that have been working on cleaning things up. So no, it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all what you hear in the media. There are many, many success stories, and I wish we would communicate them more often. Do you have any? Okay, well, let's stand around and chat, wait for the rain, and I am done. Thank you so much, everyone.